Going to be truing a wheel today, and I've got my Park Tool truing stand. I've got my tension meter, also Park Tool. You're going to need a spoke wrench, and depending on your wheel, you may need a wrench like this, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And again, depending on your wheel, whether you have bladed spokes, you may need a tool such as this. And of course, you're going to need your wheel. Obviously, you're going to need to get your wheel on the truing stand. You are going to need your through axle, so make sure you have that. And then you're going to tighten it so that it's nice and snug. So the way it works is that there's 32 or 28 spokes, and there's spokes on either side of the wheel. You can see here that these two spokes are clearly on the drive side. These two on the other side are on the non-drive side. It's not uncommon for the spoke tension to be a little bit higher on one side of the wheel than the other. But the key is to make sure that they're consistent all the way around per side. Now, if you've run the wheel for a while, it is possible that the spokes do need tightening. And so that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, because the tolerance for the tightness of the spoke will depend on the spoke and the wheel. I think the purpose of this video is that the spoke tension is okay. We just want to make sure that it's even all the way around. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start at the valve stem. I'm going to take this tool, which is a Park Tool TM1. And the way it works is the spoke is going to line up right where this dotted line is. And then I'm going to let go, and then this is going to measure the tension of that spoke. So I'm going to start with the drive side spokes, starting with this valve stem here. So you can see if I get here and I let go, it measures at about 22. So what I'm going to do is just keep going all the way around. And again, this one is 24. So again, it's not like I want to make it perfect, but more like I'm looking for spokes that are way out of range. So if I see something like the 15 range, something in the 12 range, I know that that one probably needs tightening. Okay, so if you don't have one of these fancy tools, an old school trick is that you could pluck the spokes like a musical instrument, and you kind of listen to the sound. And what you want to do is make sure that it's consistent. Oh, you see that one? Definitely sounded low. So what I'm going to do is go on the other side here, and I'm going to measure it with this. And you can see that this one is at 16 where the other ones were above 20. So this one is definitely low. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten the spoke. Depending on the wheel that you have, you're going to use different tools. For instance, I think most people are going to have the nipples on the external side, so it's external from the rim. In that case, all you're going to need is a spoke wrench. If you have a wheel that has internal nipples, in other words, the nipples are only accessible from inside the rim, unfortunately, you are going to have to remove the tire and the rim tape. The orientation is going to be like this, and it's exactly like as if you would tighten a screw. So it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Just remember that. For the majority of us that have external nipples, still the question is, which way tightens and which way loosens, because a lot of times it's not really obvious as you do it, because you only do quarter turns at a time typically. It's the same orientation as if you were tightening them from the inside. So if you ever get confused, just imagine tightening it from the outside just like a screw. So it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if you imagine that, that'll help you determine which direction you need to turn this nipple to tighten it. It's this way to tighten, this way to loosen. So again, if you start working on a wheel and you forget, just imagine tightening it from this orientation, and that should hopefully get you back on track. If you do have bladed spokes, then this is where this Park Tool is going to come in play. You're going to have to use this to hold the blade still as you tighten that spoke. Okay, so that gets us right over 20. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue doing that all the way on the drive side to make sure that there's no really uneven spokes. And when that's done, I'm going to do the exact same thing on the non-drive side. Okay, so now that that's done, let's just assume that we have relatively even spoke tension on this side. I've checked them all. Same thing on the other side, and we're ready to now true the wheel. And then I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to back this out. And what that does is it makes these little contact points come in closer. And I'm going to do that slowly until I start hearing some noise. It may be a little bit hard to see, but when I turn this, it's touching here, then it touches the other side, which is not uncommon. So I'm going to turn the wheel and then notice when it starts to touch this side. Right about here is when the rim makes contact with this point. And so here's the simple principle of wheel truing. You've got spokes on either side, right? So if the rim is touching on this side, you want the rim to go this way. And the way to do that is to make the spokes on this side tighter. And what that does, as you can imagine, when the spokes on this side get tighter, it pulls the rim this way, which is what we want. This is where it's making the noise. So I'm going to go to the opposite direction, and I'm going to give these a quarter tighter turn. And again, what that does is it pulls the rim into this direction. And then I'm going to validate. Yep, so it's still touching a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten that a little bit more, just a quarter turn at a time, very little. So that's a little bit better, but it's clear that it needs a little bit more. So I can go ahead and keep tightening. What that's going to do is it's going to make the spoke tension on the non-drive side a little bit uneven, right? So what I'm going to do to make this wheel balanced, I'm going to loosen the spokes on this side. You can see that made it much better. So that's pretty much the principles of wheel truing. So that fixed that part. And as I turn the wheel now, I can see it's very clear that now it's touching on this side at this part of the wheel. And again, I'm going to do the exact same thing, just the opposite side, right? So it's touching on this side. I'm going to tighten the spokes on the other side just a little bit to move the wheel this way. I'm going to tighten here, tighten here. I may tighten the next spoke just a little bit. Again, you don't want to do more than a quarter turn at a time. You can see that it's way better already. Okay, so you're gonna get to a point where that looks really good. You turn the wheel around and it doesn't rub either side. And what you can do at that point, depending on how anal you are, you can start backing this out just a little bit more to get those tolerances even closer and closer. And the key again is to maintain consistent spoke tension per side, and that really is what makes this wheel really strong. So that's pretty much the simple basics of it. Hopefully that demystifies some of the questions that you may have. I think a lot of people consider this kind of like black magic or something like that, but once you start doing it, it's actually really simple.